Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask a hell of a lot of questions. And those of you that like the show and have enjoyed the show, I appreciate a lot of your messages. If you want to be a bitter pill, you can for $2 by visiting patreon.com/The Bitter Truth. And my guest today is a good friend of the show. I've had him on before. Adrian Boutureira, he's been an activist pretty much his whole adult life. He was a national political organizer for Jill Stein's campaign in 2016. And we're fortunate to have him on the show this morning. Adrian, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Ed.
Excellent. How you doing?
Very well, thank you. Just surviving the heat here in Austin, Texas.
Yes, sir.
But other than that, just ready to have another dynamic chat with you about what ails our beautiful planet.
There you go. All right. Well, hey, man, listen. Let's kind of jump into it. I remember last time, we had a really eye-opening discussion on Venezuela, and I had a lot of folks either hit me up on Facebook and personal message, or they hit me up on Twitter. And folks, if you want to actually write on the site, I'd appreciate that. But a lot of folks did not know what was going on down there, and not even have the temerity to compare it to, say, Colombia, which is supposed to be capitalist, right? So I wanted to kind of jump into some of the news that's hitting this week, and going into a couple of things. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about Nicaragua, because this week the Somoza presidency, the Ortega presidency has been having some challenges, and there's calls for him to step down and trying to negotiate an exit and all that kind of thing. That's looking imminent to everybody except for Ortega. And things that I've been seeing just, on the internet, and like I was telling you a little bit earlier, I heard a piece on NPR yesterday, and, folks are disappearing, and there's, news of executions and things like that. And so I'm kind of wondering if, they got rid of Somoza, they got rid of that regime, and the Sandinistas won in a big sense. And then all of a sudden now it's like meet the new boss, same as the old boss. What's going on this week?
So let me start with quoting a Pink Floyd song title called "Careful with That Axe, Eugene," as we make reference to NPR, which more and more, and you can go and basically touch upon any theme, whether it's Syria or the Russian intervention into the elections. I mean, NPR has become a rather pathetic and disgusting mouthpiece of the State Department and U.S. interests. I mean, to the point where I used to at least, read in between the lines and be able to say, well, at least, while biased, the journalism is good. Like, for instance, in the case of The Economist or the Wall Street Journal, I mean, great reporting. It's just not coming from my point of view and my angle, or reflecting, the interests of the American struggling working class, but they do good work. And if you're smart, you can read, and you can read in between the lines. And these guys are doing a good job for you. You just have to kind of, use your critical thought to kind of read in between the lines and get the different perspective. Well, NPR has just degenerated into the worst kind of propagandistic crap.
Yeah, it's bot media.
That's just my opinion. I just cannot even listen to it anymore. Without getting disgusted. So having said that, I am not here to be an apologist for the limitations of the mistakes that have been made by the Sandinista revolution. It's important to be able to gain and to create a much bigger picture of what's going on. We know that the problems for Ortega did not start this week. This has been going on now for the better part of the year. The street demonstrations. The problem is that unless you look real deep, you're getting a very biased perspective coming out of the U.S. media and coming out of of even the European media for that matter. So, but if you do start to look a little bit deeper, you start to realize that it's not as black and white. That the forces of the Nicaraguan oligarchy, didn't just dissipate and disappear. Okay, so none of these revolutions, quote unquote, including Venezuela, and you and I touched upon this the last time.
Oh, we did more than touch. We did a deep dive into Venezuela last time, but go on.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I mean, we on this particular issue, we didn't deconstruct, how do revolutions succeed under the pressures of an oligarchy that remains entrenched in power, right, or remains entrenched in control of major aspects of the economy of the country in transition. So again, not everything can be blamed on Yankee imperialism. Not everything can be blamed on the intervention of the oligarchy.
Right.
But when you start to look beneath the surface, you start to realize, for instance, the huge, violence that has been generated, which has all been placed on Ortega's repressive regime. You start to understand that there is, for instance, huge amount of violent activity. Where gangs, that have been involved in what is known as the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, have been making inroads into Nicaragua, over the last few years. Now, this is all the result of the people that were in gangs, the Mara Salvatrucha, MS-13, Calle 18, M18, a lot of this sort of middle-level organized crime organizations that are involved in international drug trafficking and have been winning significant amount of territory in Nicaragua. So when you start to look at some of the street violence and you start to look at what's happening in some of the localities, and you start to look at how these folks are getting themselves organized, again, in the same case with like the so-called Arab Spring, you start to say, okay, well, now that requires a lot of self-discipline. That requires a lot of research to try to actually not say, okay, well, this is clearly one thing or another, right? So we're here in the United States, we love black and white sort of analysis, right? Which is it's this or that. Well, the sad truth of the matter is that, if we want to get to the bottom of a specific truth, we're going to have to work at it. And we're going to have to navigate through a lot of information, and a lot of it is just outright bullshit. And so what I'm trying to say to your audience, Abe, is that the destabilization efforts, to try to kind of, reduce what is left of the Latin American left that is still in power, which is basically, we can talk about what happened in Brazil with Lula, what happened in Ecuador with Correa. So basically we have, we have every single leftist leader that was actually, implementing things like getting rid of U.S. bases, like the Ecuadorian government did. Bringing Texaco to the international court for the horrible disaster, one of the worst environmental disasters that ever happened, an oil spill in Ecuador, which basically Correa supported 100%, and used the government to actually advance it. So all of a sudden, these guys begin to fall one after the other after the other. So you start to look at the political map of Latin America 10 years ago, where you had like leftist governments moving the general direction of the hemisphere to the left towards less prostitution of the natural resources of the country to global capital, and you start to see how systemically the war of character assassination, defamation, false accusation have been successful because there is a lot of money at stake. When you decide to pass laws that prevent, logging in 80% of the Amazon, you're talking about millions of dollars, right?
Sure.
Mining rights. Who gets the mining rights? Are you nationalizing the mining industry? Are you nationalizing the oil industries? In Nicaragua, sorry, go ahead.
No, and real quick, just to clarify, because sometimes if I don't, in my own conversation, people go, well, what do you mean? So a real quick definition of what you're talking about when we say, to nationalize, like, for example, the popular example is Venezuela. They nationalized their oil, which is why the United States has a problem with them, because they refuse to allow U.S. interests to come take their oil, subject their people to 15 cents a day, and then take out billions of dollars in loans to buy equipment that they don't need to drill for oil for the oil companies, and then pay back those U.S. dollars with U.S. interests. And that's the kind of thing most people don't understand. They don't understand what happened with the Ende in Chile. They don't understand American copper and that interest in Chile. So anyway, but continue. I just wanted to kind of make that definition a little bit more clear for folks that are listening. But continue.
Yeah, and folks don't understand the United Fruit Company, and folks don't understand, what exactly do we mean by banana republics, right? Of which Nicaragua is one, and what is the extent to which the United States, continues to be hyper dependent on natural resources, which is why we're making a huge drive in Africa. Our flow of arms sales to Africa has multiplied by 100 plus over the last 10 years, towards supporting regimes and supporting, forces within Africa that are going to be beneficial to U.S. capitalist interests, right? So it's basic, right? So the United States, as a major superpower, it's clearly acting to advance the interest of U.S. multinational corporations. That has been obvious, since in every single war and every single intervention that we participated in Latin America.
Absolutely.
So understanding that, the problem is that we have to keep our critical thought hats on. And Maduro himself in Venezuela has admitted, that the economic strategy that they are embarked upon is failing. And he actually just addressed, his party's Congress a few days ago and said, like, imperialism or not, intervention or not, sabotage or not, we need to get our shit together and we need to get back to the business of productivity, and we need to figure out how to do it, because otherwise we're going to perish. So these recognitions are happening now in Nicaragua because of the amount of street violence. The amount of street violence that has been generated, it's often okay. So there is this thing: people are disappearing. Yes, people are disappearing, and some of the people who are disappearing include people who are in positions of government, village leaders that are not necessarily allowing for the barricades to be built. So the destabilization of a country and the processes that go towards the destabilization of a country are not necessarily reflective of the perfection of the country that is being destabilized.
Right.
Ortega is far from perfect, and there's been a whole bunch of mistakes that get made. That's just the nature of government in many ways. Now, I mean, I am not yet prepared to concede to the idea that Ortega is at the brink of resigning. As a matter of fact, the Sandinistas just had a major rally. I believe it was last week or 2 weeks before, with hundreds of thousands of people in downtown Managua. And I'm not quite sure that it's going to go down just that easily. Now, of course, there is the church has turned against them. Ortega, by the way, is like a devout Catholic and and has actually, been an anti-abortion advocate. You name it. He has embraced the Catholic Church for support, and now they turn against them. He has accused them of collaborating with the oligarchy and with imperialism, of course. And so, the church is the church, except for some gaps in the trajectory, by certain leaders. which were the proponents of the liberation theology sort of philosophy. The church has mostly been a force of reactionary power.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, so that's all. I mean, it's really complicated. So,
well, it is,
but
that brings me to the question. For example, if we're having, not we, but if countries are having revolutions, for example, and they're not booting out the oligarchs, and they're not, they're trying to make do with a structure of some kind, which I can understand because you want some semblance of familiarity for the people, but on the same token, isn't that like Iran in the 50s? Mossadegh tried to make nice with Europe and the United States. Hey, we're going to nationalize our oil, but we'll sell it to you. And BP and the CIA were like, well, fuck you, no, you're not, and we're going to take it back. And they did. They reinstalled the Shah in 1953, and he went on a 26-year rampage. And then finally, when the Ayatollah took over in 79, it was a big shock to everybody. All we got was that narrative from that point in history. No one went back and said, okay, well, hey, here's what happened. This is what we did. The Shah's dad was in there first, and then we upset him by having Iran invaded by Britain and Russia and put the Shah's son in, Shah II, which might have been awkward at Thanksgiving. And then he rules for 10 years before he's upended, and then we reinstall him. So it's like, and they had help. I mean, Mossadegh's government helped the United States to reinstall the Shah. So at one point, do we sweep clean in a revolution like with these third parties? I'm really excited these progressives are, winning primaries and challenging the establishment. But then when they get in, what does upset the apple cart enough that we actually get some real change? That's not some systematized, institutionalized edict that completely enslaves us and keeps us under the in America, for example, under a corporate oligarchy that does run everything and does run NPR and does run MSDNC and Fox News or whatever. At one point do we really sweep clean?
Well, Abe, I mean, this is a question that has been haunting the left for decades, and I wish I don't have an answer. That the response to that and the magnitude of that question can very easily overwhelm the best of us.
It overwhelms me.
in some ways, we're thinking about, we start to think about kind of the historical moments that can serve as specific triggers, right? I mean, there is the theory that says that the things have to be just right in order for that radical shift to happen. That you can't just kind of impose it. For instance, the critique of the failure of the Russian Revolution by Russia, the revolution having happened, not like Marx said in an major industrialized powerhouse nation that, like Germany or England at the time, but to happen in a rather backwards rural society like Russia, led to the failure of the revolution's success. So there is this theory that says that, change and the kind of radical change that is needed needs to be kind of accompanied by a set of historical, political, and economic circumstances that make for that shift to happen. Like, let's say at the brink of 1968, right? When revolutions began to erupt all over the world, Mexico City, Paris, Chicago. There seemed to be a certain momentum there, which in Spanish they called, it's the coyuntura theory, the conjuncture, when all of this, social, political, and economic forces kind of come to a head. Now, is that some sort of illusion? One starts to wonder, right? Now, we do know that this is not sustainable. We do know that, for instance, we are heading towards the widening of the margin between the haves and the have-nots at a rate that is exponentially greater than it had been.
Yes.
Now, how sustainable is that? So we can even begin to say that, Trump's election begins to show a reflection of a radical change, not unlike the radical changes that happened in Europe in the 1930s, right? So we are coming to some sort of a head of a conflict. Now, is the left prepared for that? In the United States, it's not, right? There is no real national united infrastructure that I can recognize under the leadership of any significant party or anything else that can accommodate a convergence of leftist forces that can actually, begin a systemic assumption of power, whether it's, beginning at the local level and moving to the state level. Through the ballot box. And so where is this change going to happen? Who has access to the ballot box? Who can actually get elected? And then you start to talk about individuals within the progressive independent movement that are being elected with the support of folks like DSA, the Democratic Socialist of America, which are like an off branch of the Democratic Party,
right.
So are held suspect themselves, but they, in some ways they are at least rolling up their sleeves and trying to get some of these progressives elected into power.
And they're asking the questions. That's the other part too. It gets back to I think the root cause of this narcolepsy is that we don't ask questions, and if we just don't. And if you ask a question, for example, I got in a discussion with somebody the other day about, the $15 minimum wage. And his argument to me was, well, that's unsustainable. I said, well, why don't we come up with an idea? How about a solution? How about we take $200 billion out of defense and put that into the Department of Labor, and a small business that can only afford to pay $10, $11 an hour can now apply for a subsidy. Now that worker gets $15. He's paying more in taxes. He's got more money to put in the economy. And the business owner gets a break. Right? How come we can't do that? But we can bail out oligarchs. We could bail out idiot bankers who can gamble and get trillions of dollars in aid, but we can't help the American homeowner. I mean, these are questions that nobody really wants to tackle because they're so fucking busy about Russia. I got news for you. Russia, isn't responsible for 50% of people making under $30,000 a year. Russia is not responsible for 65% of people not having $1,000 for an emergency. Russia is not responsible for our education system and the lack of free college. I went to free college. I paid $100 a quarter to go to Cal Poly Pomona. Now it's $5,000 a quarter. I don't think a 12-unit quarter increased in value by 500 times. So or 50
right.
times.
No,
so
exactly.
So,
no, I mean, hey, yes. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm just saying that we to speak to your point. I think, like you said, the DSA and human beings are highly suspect. I suspect everybody, but we're just not even asking. We don't even have a discourse in this country anymore to ask questions. The gun control issue comes up, for example. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but if we look at the statistics down of another country, and you simply say, hey, Japan has half the population we do, and gosh, they only had 10 homicides by gun. We had 10,000. Now, I'm not counting the suicides. I'm just counting actual gun murders. We got like 12, 13,000 a year, and Japan only has 10, and they have half the population.
Right.
Well, why don't we ask them what they're doing? Maybe there's some things that we can't control. They're more homogenous culture. They're on an island, whatever. But can't we ask them? Hey, what are y'all guys doing? But to even say that, well, if you like it so much, go live in Japan. It's like stupid crap like that. But all that is just to speak to your point. But I wanted to continue, on with what we're talking about here with Nicaragua, and specifically we're talking about oligarchies, and how right. do we begin to systematically make these changes at a deep roots level?
So yes, I mean, and always, I would encourage folks always be, additionally, suspicious when you see political violence escalate in a country that, empire has on its sights, right? Mm-hmm. Ortega has not been a huge friend of the United States since the revolution. Venezuela and Nicaragua have collaborated a lot. They were, at the peak of leftist rule in Latin America. There was the discussion of a new trade pact new banking institutions, you name it. The Ortega regime, with all of its limitations, remains in the sights of U.S. empire.
Right.
And when we witness an escalation, and we witness an escalation of political violence as we are witnessing and organized. Okay, because some of the things that when you start to research and you start to read alternative news that are not just unofficial but different sources, you start to sort of read, what is Telesur saying,
right.
Telesur being the network that is owned by the Venezuelan government. When you go to Telesur to read on Nicaragua, what are you reading there?
But real quick question, isn't Telesur kind of a conglomerate of several governments? It's not just Venezuela. Isn't it also Panama and Ecuador that kind of co-own Telesur, or is that not right?
Well, I mean, who flips the bill, right? I mean, it's always been Venezuela Oil, and because they have the money. But I think I know that Venezuela is the key, one of the key countries. You could be right, and I must admit that I'm not quite sure what other countries are involved. I believe that Telesur was a network, that came into existence under the Chavez government.
Okay.
As a response to sort of as part of this. We need to tell our own stories. We need to present our own news. We need to reclaim the narrative, right? Now, of course, it's going to have its perspective. It's going to be, very much, expressing a very pro Latin American nationalist, liberation rhetoric. But you can start to put things together on your own. And when we start to look at the way in which these street protests are being organized, at the way in which leadership, local leadership is being targeted, the model of the another color revolution, right? I mean, that's the model that is being. So you have the increase of the paramilitary groups. That are out on the streets, escalating the conflict to a high level of political violence. So we're talking about securing territories, right? Using chaos, intimidation, coercion, at the local level in the towns. So it's not as if again, we have to look at was the Libyan so-called revolution a revolution at all? And where are those people now? Where is the popular, where is the success of the Libyan revolution if it was legitimate and the people were out on the streets and this was like democratic forces? Where are the results of that?
Well, where's the coverage? Where's the coverage of that? That's that when we talk about a quick piggyback on what you're talking about, Telesur. Okay, they may be presenting a South American narrative. However, there's nothing, and I'm not saying you said this, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because right now all we get presented is with one side of the story. And I don't know how many people can tell me to my face that it's emotionally or intellectually honest to assume that there's only one hand clapping, that there's not two sides to a story. That, and sometimes the other side is just bullshit. But I want to have the choice to make that decision. And with the Libyan coverage, for example, with Benghazi, those trials were a joke. We kept going on about the embassy. These guys, the Republicans who were so after Obama, they had an opportunity to go, well, why the fuck were we in Libya 6 months prior, knocking over a sitting leader with the same failed strategy that George W. Bush had? And why was the embassy funneling weapons to, quote, moderate rebels, unquote, to keep the fight going? We weren't even questioning in the American media why we were in Libya in the first place, and it all stemmed out of that bullshit Arab Spring, which had a nucleus of sincerity in Tunisia, and then that was it. All that to me was a CIA fucking plot to tell the other Arab leaders, this is what's going to happen. We're going to find you in a fucking hole. We're going to hang you. Do not rattle your sabers. Do not rock the boat. Do not do what we don't say to do. And that's exactly, in my opinion, what was a scare tactic. I mean, look what happened in Egypt as soon as I'm forgetting the name. He was a Muslim Brotherhood guy, and oh my God, he was terrible. But he was democratically elected. Okay, you got rid of Mubarak, and you elected this guy. Oh, but you didn't like him, so now he's in jail looking at an execution. And by the way, this guy taught
every single leader.
Yeah.
every single leader of the brother Muslimhood it was in prison. They shut down every single one of their operations, whether political or community based. No. The crackdown was brutal,
yes.
And of course, when you start to look at the characters that were involved, one puppet after another.
Right.
I mean, they were crawling out of the woodwork, including I forget his name, that used to be in the nuclear, working for the United Nations in Iraq. Who was one of the key guys that started to fabricate information on behalf of the United. Yes, exactly. And now they brought him, as some sort of neutral kind of.
Right.
I mean, it was a circus. It was a bona fide. Yeah, and like you said, we had about 5 minutes worth of authenticity coming out of Tunisia, and after that, it was just a geopolitical nightmare for the Arab people, as far as I'm concerned. In terms of a complete destabilization of the region and the destruction of whole societies and complete economies. Libya will never be the same. Libya will never be the country that under the rule of this horrible monster Gaddafi, managed to keep everybody housed, fed everybody, was providing, free, education to women.
And women had white, and women, by the way, could drive in Libya. Okay. Unlike goddamn Saudi Arabia, that just barely allowed in June, women could drive in the daytime.
No, drive and become doctors and become teachers.
Right.
And Libya was basically, even under international studies, from anywhere that had one of the highest standards of living in the whole of Africa.
See, and really quick to pick,
Libya would never be that. Libya is now exactly where the West wishes every Arab country to be,
right,
in a complete state of chaos.
Right.
Ripe for intervention, occupied by the West, with every single excuse to continue to intervene, and basically with the natural resources at the disposal of the West, even that has kind of backfired, but they still have it in the bag. And France secure its geopolitical control of the region,
and Sarkozy's
its banking institutions.
And Sarkozy's on trial this summer for taking $50 million from Gaddafi. You want to talk about election fraud. And then a few years later, now that they don't have nukes anymore, let's go ahead and destroy Libya. The other point I was going to make really quick, and I want you to finish your thought, but I wanted to just jump in really fast because I want to handle the objection. I know there's some people listening right now, and they're going to say, oh, well, but he was a dictator. He was bad to his own people. Maybe Gaddafi did some things, and everyone points to Lockerbie, and I'm not going to say he was a perfect leader by any stretch. He was a dictator. I get it. But no one pays attention to Saudi Arabia. We don't even cover Saudi Arabia. Everyone was freaking out about ISIS, chopping off 2 heads a week. Saudi Arabia chops off 40 heads a week, and we don't say anything. And then they make that fucking prince the head of the UN Commission on Human Rights. I'm like, are you out of your fucking mind? But here in America, we do like it black and white, and we like it to go down easy. We don't like it. We don't like to have two sides.
Oh no, man, and the race, the racial, the racist connotations. Saudi Arabia, and why not just take it to the next level and talk about Israel?
Sure.
And talk about the genocide of thousands of people and the permanent occupation against all international law of one of the recipients of the biggest recipient of U.S. military aid, basically being a rogue nuclear power.
Who's never submitted
that has professionalized the murder of armed people. And talk about, if people want to talk about intervening in U.S. politics,
yes,
let's talk about Israel. Let's talk about Netanyahu showing up at the U.S. Congress and without the invitation of the president addressing the U.S. Congress,
getting a standing ovation
on 2015. Getting a standing ovation, critiquing the policies of a standing government right before an election year, okay? And now, how in the world has the media managed to overlook the detail of Israeli intervention in U.S.
Well, and they also like to overlook.
Now,
but they also like to overlook, just real quick. They also like to overlook the fact that they have an estimated, because we don't know this for sure, between 300 and 500 nuclear warheads, and they have never once submitted to IAEA inspections, ever.
No,
not once. And so, meanwhile, they're armed to the teeth like India and Pakistan, who, by the way, they have to submit to that crap. But we don't make Israel do it. And this is not, by the way, if anyone's listening, this is not an anti-Semitic thing any more than being against, South Africa means I hate white people. They are just misbehaving. When a government misbehaves, you got to call them on it. The Holocaust was.
No, I mean, you can't. No, man, you can't use that for cover. I mean,
they do, though. They do. They go right.
And this goes to your audience. Anybody who still believes that narrative, you need to question your own motives.
Okay.
If you're still towing the line, folks out there, that any critique of Israel is tantamount to anti-Semitism, then you are part of the problem and not part of the solution, because a state that is recognized by the world over, except for Guam, the United States, and Guatemala, as committing atrocities against humanity repeatedly, as violating, United Nations mandates, as illegally occupying other people's land, and then not living up to the Geneva Convention's responsibility as an occupying power, which is mandated to safeguard the well-being of the population that you're occupying, which is, something that, one violation after another, that has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And by the way, Palestinians are Semitic people.
Absolutely. I was going to make that point. I'm half Arab.
More ignorance upon ignorance upon ignorance.
You can't corner the market on the word Semite. My dad's an Arab. He's a Semite. For me to be anti-Semitic means I hate half my family. So there's that. The other part that drives me bananas is. They always, people always go to the Holocaust. I'm like, that was an atrocity, and that happened. And we had 10, 12 genocides in the last century. Yet not 3 years after the Holocaust, you have an entire group of people colonizing and slaughtering another group of people simply for who they are. Didn't that just happen? Didn't that just happen in Europe? And now you're doing the same thing without regard? And just recently, last week,
the Jewish groups while Britain still occupied, Palestine, were considered a terrorist organization that were, placing bombs in buildings even before they occupied, even before the formation of Israel. Some of these folks who eventually became prime ministers, were part of this terrorist organization.
100%. Benny Begin, all those guys, absolutely.
Yes, exactly. So so we gotta get a grip, and we gotta keep our critical thinking hats on. Again, the idea being going back. The encouraging thing, what we need to encourage folks to do, and you were asking me so we jumped around a little bit between, Latin America and the realities in Nicaragua and meet the new boss, same as the old boss. I want to encourage folks to read, beyond, the Western media, right, so that they can start creating, their own sort of critical assessment of what the situation is. I believe that there are indeed forces at play that are invested in the destabilization of the Noriega regime. I think that we have the chaos that is taking place in the streets is not accidental. The escalation of the political violence, some of these disappearances, can be. The state is going to defend itself, and that's no justification, but I don't know of any government that is going to go belly up and say, okay, we're done. You guys have a whole bunch of street thugs, organizing in the streets, practicing extortion of communities, building barricades, looting businesses, assassinating officials, and in order to sort of secure territory, and we're just going to go belly up. We're not going to mobilize. That is really absurd. Now the level of violence and the escalation of the violence has to be assessed based on what is happening on the ground. And the sad truth of the matter is that we're not getting the complete story. And I'm not saying that the Sandinista position is the correct position, or that their version of the story is the exact correct version of the story. I'm just saying that, if we read what we're reading, these are not people that have even bothered to look at the other side of the story.
Right.
And that is not journalism, and that is not what we should be basing our opinions upon. I believe that, when it comes to the institutional sort of limitations of elected officials and this transition to change, that we can, piggyback on perhaps the pressures that both Venezuela and Nicaragua are coming under. We are going to have to figure out how an empire like the United States in collusion with the Western, European powerhouses, how does this come to an end in such a way that, limits the amount of violence, yet provides a positive result for the vast majority of the people, and that's a question that has to be asked. There is no harm, by the way, in following a process of electoral, politics. As long as we are under no illusion that, that alone can shift the direction of capitalist imperialism, especially at the heart of it all. In other words, the changes that we can make here, the changes that your audience can make locally, right? By taking over their city council governments, by being able to create alliances and to create, effective electoral alliances with a progressive agenda. The changes that can happen at that level are very real. The difference between having a health clinic, that is paid by your city versus having a whole bunch of people like out on the streets getting sick, it's real. So, I hate when some, lefties, have this macro view, and it's like, well, we're just going to talk about how we're going to reach our revolutionary objectives like in 50 years and like sit here and intellectually masturbate to that. And, nothing else matters. That to me, it is the worst type of political narcissism that you can imagine, right? Real people's lives can be affected by the changes that we can make, but we have to think, and we have to be building, these processes of transformation, not built around a candidate, but we have to be aware that each step along the way has to be part of a political education process, so that, we're moving towards an awakening of the American mind. We're moving towards an awakening of our collective consciousness, so that we are understanding that, we're in it for the long haul, right? And that we need to stay put, because, this is how you build a movement. At one point or another, we need to be organized enough to deliver an effective general strike in this country.
Right. See, but
right?
okay, and I agree with what you're saying, but to point to a couple of macro things that did happen fast, and not good things necessarily. In 1984, for example, in 1983, Reagan ersatz defunded state hospitals in this country. We used to have state hospitals. The homeless problem was not an issue until I was in college. We had Skid Row, which was, basically, just a bunch of winos. Those are the only real guys that didn't have a place to live. And most people that, if they were out of work for a little while, they had the wherewithal, they found another job. We had jobs in this country. But we didn't release people out of state hospitals with such a low threshold as we did from the mid 80s moving forward. I do employee benefits for my day job. That's what I do. And in California, I was living in California. I had 6 state hospitals as part of a collective of this union that I used to work with. And I would visit the state hospitals to go see the union guys. They were psychiatric technicians. And of these 6 state hospitals, of which when I was a kid, 4 of them were for regular crazy people. Okay. And then now only 1 is for regular mentally challenged folks. The rest are all for the quote unquote criminally insane. Got to fill the bed somehow. Okay, that guy was able to cop a criminally insane plea. So instead of going to prison, he gets to go to a state mental institution with everyone else that's, violent and whatever else. We got rid of the rooms for just genuinely ill people or people with a drug problem. That's who we put out into the streets. And Reagan created that with the stroke of a pen. So, I agree with you on the micro level, but there are things on a macro level that can be achieved and through movement.
But yeah. And Reagan has gone on to become idealized even by Democrats. Right. In other words, American historical revisionism is brutal.
Fucking worse.
Now, in my comment before, I said Noriega and I meant Ortega, but I was thinking Noriega in terms of what happened in Panama, right? In terms of our strong man in Panama, what happened to him? When he decided that he wasn't necessarily going to play ball, it only took the United States, a month to fabricate a war.
Yes.
Deposed Noriega, threw him in the slammer for life, and here we are. Basically, we had to cough up the canal, but definitely under our terms and with conditions in Panama itself as a country much more conducive to U.S. being able to do our business. Now, Reagan, was at least honest in his insanity or in his dismantling of the welfare state, in his neoliberalism. Yes. He was very transparent, and I think that we have to remember that it was through Reaganomics, which is basically the consolidating of what we now call neoliberalism. Right, which is basically the complete dismantling of the welfare state and replacing it with in economics we can call the fascist economic model, which is basically the perfect marriage between capital and the state, right under more and more draconian oppressive. You name it, right? In other words, the surveillance state, the persecution, the infiltration of resistance movements. All of that. There are things happening today that were unfathomable, before Reagan. Even as bad as things were. I'm not trying to say the good old days,
No, I understand.
Make America great again, right? That's not where this is coming from. It's just that, we have to be attentive, to a real, process of deterioration, in terms of civil liberties, in terms of economics, in terms of what is it that how do we perceive the role of the state, right? And Americans have been effectively brainwashed into thinking that the state will always be their enemy, and that private capital is basically the guarantor of their best interests, right? Which has no reference in history. The state has, on the other hand, proven
over and over,
when it works, and to provide people with an affordable education, to provide working class people with programs that help them advance and help support your families, protecting the rights of organized labor. Not without a struggle, not without the deaths of hundreds of mine workers, at the turn of the century and in the 30s.
Or even striking union workers being beaten with bats by hired thugs. What you make a good point when you say that people vote against their own interests. Everything that we have in this country came from demand. The 40-hour work week, the abolition of child labor abuse, women's right to vote. That didn't come because the government just one day said, "Okay, women can vote." That came from demand. A 40-hour work week came from demand. Vacation days, health insurance, that came from demand. Like
public education,
100%,
public education,
100%.
So you name it. The problem is that it is. Okay, but we can use public education as a perfect example, right? So you basically discredit the institution, right? So that basically, not even leftists want to send their kids to public school anymore. Nope. Because it's worked. Right, so there is no longer confidence in the institution to basically safeguard, your child's education, and that is not accidental. So when you manage to disinvest in public education to the beat of like having 30 children coming from, very difficult backgrounds, in one classroom, and then you tell the teacher, teach them something, and you pay the teacher like $30,000 a year. You know what I mean? That is not a formula that is going to produce a high-quality educational system. So you dismantle the public institutions. You make them fail, right? That is the system. That's how it works. And then people lose faith in government as a vehicle to advance their own interests. And then you land exactly where we are now, right? Government being but a vehicle to sort of express your frustrations and your rejection of government, right? So you vote for someone like Trump who tells you, it's like, I'm not going to govern, really. I am going to basically make America great again by deregulating every single restriction on corporations,
right.
To do whatever they want, whether it's mining in sacred indigenous land or you name it. I'm going to let them do it, right? I mean, he just lifted a ban on pesticides that are directly linked to the demise of the bee population. You name it, he's doing it, right?
Right.
And people are like, yes, fuck government, do it, give it to them. And it's like, no, government, it's us for the time being, unless we're ready. But they're not ready to take to the streets and have an actual revolution to say we're going to reorganize this country in bioregions, or we're going to declare independent states out of California. No, everybody's still towing the line. We're still living, but again, we're reaching that utopic fascist vision of like a despotic, government at the service of global capital, or in this case, a national oligarchy.
Right.
So to me, it is, people have to understand how Reagan played a major role in the dismantling of the welfare state, which is what you were describing. You were a beneficiary of it, at the end tail of it. I can say I received a pretty decent public education myself in the 1970s. But it's been down ever since.
Sure.
And you cannot guarantee a citizen of the wealthiest country in the world a hospital stay that is not going to bankrupt them. Right. So and then they do things like Obamacare. Right, they institute these things that are ultimately being couched as something that is for the benefit of the American working class or whatever. But they turn it into
while being crafted by big insurance and big pharma and the Heritage Foundation.
Exactly. It becomes like, I mean, what is this if not corporate welfare? You're forcing people to buy insurance from private insurance companies that are like, basically hiking up the price of insurance.
There's no controls. There's no controls. There's no penalties when the insurance companies pull out. And even with Obamacare, that the so-called left hates to acknowledge, we still have 45,000 people a year dying in this country for lack of coverage. So what the fuck is ACA about?
Right. And Lieberman and the Democratic Party and it's fully responsible for the lack of single payer, a single payer option. They had control of both houses, and then they allowed for that Zionist bastard Lieberman, to go in there and single-handedly almost say, well, I'm not gonna, I can't support this, so we need to take, if you want my vote, and at that point, I think it should have been, this is where leadership comes in. This is where leadership comes in, and Obama needed to go on television and say, I am experiencing a corporate coup around this issue. Right. My fellow Americans, this is the deal for you.
That's what FDR used to do. That's what FDR used to do.
Right. You get Huey Long, man. You get out there but you know what? This is when it became obvious, right? That this was already in the works. There is no conspiracy. Right. Obama, if you look at his cabinet appointments, it was from an email from
Goldman Sachs. His cabinet came from an email from Goldman Sachs. That's like,
well,
continue.
Mr. Activist, person of color, who sold us that package, right? I'm not saying the guy was Satan, incarnate, okay? Because it's like demonizing people also kind of creates the
no, but hang on. But here was
a
guy, and people freak out when I say this. We have not had a president expend political capital since Nixon. I mean, we have not had one president expend political capital and jeopardize their fucking presidency since Nixon. I mean, that guy actually passed the HMO Act. He passed the Cancer Act. He passed Title IX. All while Vietnam was going on, he was fucking up there, and Watergate obviously was ethically challenged. But he actually put his thumbs in the eyes of his base and said, "No, I'm going to pass EPA. I'm going to do HUD. Sorry," and he pissed those guys off. That's why when Watergate happened, it was no secret that he had no friends on the right, and Vietnam fucked him with the left. There was no way he was going to survive an impeachment hearing. But we haven't had a president do that. Obama didn't expend 1 ounce of political capital. Ever.
No.
Ever. Bush didn't do it either.
No. I mean, basically, he had plenty of opportunities to help consolidate. If that were to be the role and the intentionality of the Democratic Party, he could have taken Lieberman down.
Absolutely,
he could have come. He could have called for mass mobilization.
Yes.
You can appeal to the people. You're the president of the people.
At least
you are not appealing.
Okay, I'm sorry. To at least get the public option put in there. The public option isn't even single payer. It just allows me to buy Medicare before I'm 65, which is still cheaper than insurance on those platforms if I'm not lying about my income. I mean, I have some friends of mine that go, "Oh, I have Obamacare. It works great. How much do you pay? $4 a month." You're lying about your income. There's no fucking way. If you make over 40 grand a year and you get Obamacare for $4 a month, you're fucking lying, and the IRS is going to bust you for that. So it's
this bullshit bourgeois morality, man.
Yeah.
At this point in time, it's like we're more concerned about. I don't give a shit about somebody. Look, universal health care for all in the richest country in the world. People should be concerned about their tax dollars going to the murder of innocent women and children all over this world to the beat of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And this repulsive capitalist bourgeois morality where we're concerned about, it's like, well, if somebody's been selling pot on the streets and, it's like maybe they need to be doing some hard time because, if somebody, it's like, walks into a store and shoplifts. So they got us trapped into this, peasant mentality.
That accepts
law and order, to maintain the status quo, right? So basically, like throwing a rock through the window of a McDonald's is now like considered an act of terrorism or something. But then, fabricating, a drone, that annihilates a whole village, receives a tax abatement, for that company, right? And so Americans love that stuff, man. This is like, this is the one of the most repulsive aspects of our culture, I believe, is that class, that type of lack of critical analysis
100%.
of what constitutes real morality, what constitutes real justice, what is your analysis of your community, where are you standing in your community when you go to your schools, when you see your public schools, what do you see when you walk into a hospital, right? And you see people's desperate faces. Like I had to take a friend the other day, and I had a feeling when I looked around, looking at the fear in people's faces and hearing some of the conversations that I overheard while I waited for her to get out. Like, it's like people don't know how they're going to pay these bills.
That's right. In the richest country in the world. But here's the thing. Those very same people have it baked into their brains that the selective socialism, and that's what I call it, the selective socialism of supporting the big banks, you support Wall Street, but you fuck Main Street, of supporting big pharma, big oil, big insurance, big everybody, at the expense of the taxpayer. I would like to get rid of the Department of Defense and have Exxon hire mercenaries to pay for their own fucking wars. I want to see how long that would last. Last.
They're kind of. We're hiring their mercenaries for them, right?
No, but we're also paying defense contractors. Exxon will not pay for a Boeing. Exxon will not pay Raytheon for missiles, but we will. And so so that's my point is if the tax dollar gets out of the equation, how long will this bullshit last? They'll come up with it. They'll come up with it with a thing real quick. I remember when the OJ trial was going on, not to get down that rabbit hole, but I remember when they finally started wrapping up their closing arguments. It's when he sold his Heisman Trophy. Okay, when the money was gone and he had to sell his Heisman and auction off all his shit to pay for the dream team, that's when they began closing arguments. They drained the guy and they go, oh, okay, we're ready to wrap up now. And that's the same thing here. If the tax dollar went away, if the defense contractors had to foot the bill themselves because they believe in what they're doing, then you know what? We wouldn't have any more war. And we're not fighting for our rights or freedoms, but it's baked into the American consciousness that somehow our military is protecting us from fucking a what? What are they protecting us from? Nothing.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely, there is definitely no direct threat. I mean, I believe that the general philosophy, which, the true believers adhere to, is that, the success of American corporate capital, will just trickle down. Given, in other words, they say, look, no matter what you leftists are saying, most people would rather be in the United States than in Guatemala. Most people would rather be in the United States than even, in some countries of Europe. Most people would like to. So, yes, okay, so we're fucking shit up. We are definitely, at the service of multinational corporations, and, we are highly invested in corporate dominance around the world. But, we are still Rome, right?
Yes.
People still want to be citizens of Rome. And you guys are not leaving. None of you are moving to Cuba, are you? Okay, right. So then, that's the argument.
But then I got friends that moved to Sweden. I got friends that moved to Finland. I have friends that moved to Germany.
There's expats everywhere. But, the idea being that, the true believers adhere to that construct. They adhere to that narrative. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that even that narrative is beginning to have huge holes, right? To where, there are, poverty levels in this country are increasing, at a insane rate. People are actually suffering. People, and I believe that, we have to be realistic about what is it how do we visualize society? This is the question. It's what is it that you want? The average person, what do you visualize as something that will provide you with a better quality of life? Right. What do you need? Do you really need the uncertainty of not knowing how you're going to pay for a doctor's visit when your kids are sick? Do you really need to be worrying about, taking a second or third job just so that your kid can graduate with a bachelor's, with a BA, that it's not, you can wipe your ass with it these days, right. It doesn't buy you anything.
Right.
I mean, do you really need to be worrying about, losing your house, the moment, within 2 paychecks of losing your job? I mean, is this acceptable to you all? Because if it's not, then you have to stop buying, the narrative that no government is best, and that, corporations should continue to be allowed to rule the world, because there is no way that corporations are going to be granting us anything.
That's
you said before, these things have come not just through demands, but through blood, right?
Yes,
in other words,
right.
How many hundreds of workers had to die to stop the exploitation of children in the mines, to be able to bring the 40-hour week.
Yes.
Just all of the basic things. So yeah, I mean the work is cut out for us. I do believe that, look, if I allowed for some of the sentiments that we're discussing to basically dominate my life, I would not know a moment's peace. So, we have to accept that, I may not see changes that I want to see changed in the world in my lifetime. In the meantime, I'm going to do everything I can to continue to educate, to continue to organize, and to continue to support what I believe are the sanest possible policies, towards the survival of my community and the survival of the planet, right? I mean, that's if we can all make a commitment to that, it may not seem like, not everybody can be Che Guevara, right? Not everybody wants to be Che Guevara. Not everybody needs to be or should be Che Guevara. Mm-hmm. What we need is people who at least can make a commitment to some critical thought and to some minimum amount of involvement in the caretaking of their communities, in the caretaking of their own children's future. Because at the rate in which we're going, we have a country of what are we now? 16 million people?
About 340.
And how many of those millions are doing anything other than, just trying to make it from one paycheck to the next and getting distracted with their iPhones and watching sports on a plasma TV that they're still paying for, man. In other words, we need to figure out how we can generate some kind of process of awakening, at least in the upcoming generations.
Absolutely.
And so that's the responsibility of all of us. That's, I think, what you're trying to do. I think that's what I'm trying to do, and we need to make peace with that. Because short of that, at this point in time, I don't particularly think that the kind of institutional radical change that you were addressing at the beginning of the conversation is just, it's around the corner. And if it happens, it's going to happen, under the wrong side, right? Because the right at this point in time is much more organized than the left.
Absolutely.
And so, like, we are, we're in Germany again in the 1930s, right?
Yep.
And we're getting our asses kicked yet again. So it's almost like a nightmare, some sort of weird deja vu, right?
Yeah.
I look at Trump. Have you noticed how he has assumed the persona of Benito Mussolini? The way
he did that. We got to start wrapping up here, but he did that during the campaign. He kept jutting his chin out during the campaign, and I'm going, is anybody not noticing the Mussolini impression he's doing? He's doing the pursed lips and his chin's out there. I thought his hand was going to go up, like the Italians do. Ciao bella, any second I was waiting for that. He kind of restrained himself. Maybe he had a handler catch him, but he looked like Mussolini. But listen, Adrian, we're gonna have to start wrapping this up. But I genuinely I appreciate your passion. I genuinely appreciate your time. And, folks, we talked about a lot of things today. And, bottom line, like I said earlier, if you want to be a patron of the show, you can visit patreon.com/The Bitter Truth. And my guest today has been Adrian Boutureira. We're going to have, some links that he wants to have supported attached to the show. Some information obviously is going to be on the description of the show. But definitely appreciate you guys' time and you listening and taking time to get something else from who I respect as a real expert in many issues in the world. And if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.